Okay, I am going to call to order the Monday, March 16th, 2020, public meeting of the City of Falls Church Planning Commission. Before I have you call the roll, Ms. Bazemore, we do have two participants on the phone. We'll have them roll call in, and then in the meeting itself, we will have a motion to allow them to participate remotely. So please call the roll.
Mr. Rankin?
I am here.
Mr. Krasner?
Here.
Ms. Teets?
Here.
Mr. Puentes? Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Ms. Weiss?
Here.
Mr. Wadiska?
Here.
All right, so noting that Ms. Weiss and Mr. Wodiska are here virtually via telephone, before I get a motion to adopt the agenda, I'd like someone to modify it to insert an item before number 4, which will be a motion to allow remote participation. Anyone agreeable to that adjustment to our agenda?
Yes, so moved. Second.
All right, all those in favor of the agenda as modified, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Nope, that passes. Great. Item number 3.5. Who needs to make this motion? Mr. Stoddard? I got it via email. I don't know if anyone else has
Anyone
it.
on the commission, any of the members present could make it.
All right, well,
Mr. Chair, I move that the
you-
commission,
there's a specific.
Oh.
Can you read that?
I move that the Planning Commission approve electronic participation by Commissioners Weiss and Commissioner Wadiska in tonight's meeting for the following reasons: pursuant to Planning Commission policy on participation in meetings through electronic means.
I think their excuse is global pandemic.
Correct.
So noted.
Zombie apocalypse and/or global pandemic.
All right, can we get a second on that? All right, I think we need a quick roll call vote, please.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
Yes.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
I don't know if the remote people get to vote or not. No,
No, not in this motion.
they don't. But it passes. You're welcome to join the meeting. Thank you. Real quick, as I mentioned, there's thankfully no public here. This is a public meeting. We're prepared to instruct the public to keep physical separation. We are trying to stay fairly far apart here. 2 of our members are participating remotely because of the current virus situation. We've modified the agenda that was published last week to eliminate a couple of items in order to keep this meeting relatively short, but we do have some action items that we do need to get to and hopefully take action on. And I guess we can cover this at the end, but I think these are special times, so I don't know what the requirements will be next month, but I do think we are required to have a meeting every month. I'm going to suggest, Paul, we aim for something later in April rather than earlier, but we can work that out at the end. So in terms of the agenda, I assume we don't have any petitions from the public. Seeing none, we are going to hopefully circle back on item 5 of the speaker series at a future date, which brings us to 6A, the Washington Gas Easement and West End Park.
Yes, Chair, and members of the commission, this is an update to the staff report that was provided to you all at your previous meeting. The action before the commission, it's a request to make a recommendation on a proposed easement for the placement of a gas regulator station in the West End Park. Most of the information remains unchanged. What is changed in the report are some responses to the commission's specific questions. For folks who may be seeing this item in the public for the first time, this is a proposed relocation of an existing facility within the city that is currently located on the high school grounds for the George Mason High School. As part of the redevelopment of the site, a new home for an existing gas regulator station is needed. The gas regulator station, for background, is a pressure control system that steps down the pressure from the regional distribution system to the local service network. The station does need to be located somewhere where those 2 pipes are in vicinity to one another, the regional pipes and the local pipes, which limited the search to the corridor along West Broad Street. Initially, there were plans to include the gas regulator station as part of the redevelopment of the site. They were going to be used on shared land where a shared parking garage was going to be constructed. Ultimately, it was decided not to construct that shared parking garage, which led to a reconfiguration of the West Falls Church area. And that meant looking for other public land where the regulator could be placed. A variety of options were explored as described in the staff report. And ultimately, staff made the recommendation of locating it inside of West End Park. And that is the recommendation before the commission tonight. In terms of scheduling, there was flexibility within the proposed schedule to defer last meeting's action to tonight. The action is proposed for action by council at their meeting next Monday.
All right, thank you. Anyone have questions, comments? Melissa?
Okay, so they went over all this with the Recs and Parks Committee last week, and they had many of the same questions we had, whether any places, other places looked at, and there's a lot of discussion about if they could narrow the amount of property that they're going to use and things like that, and the answer to that was no. So there's only really one remaining, like, they're resigned to it. They're not happy, but they're resigned to it being moved there. So I guess they've accepted. They've got past denial and anger,
Right.
and they're accepting it now.
Okay.
And but the remaining issue is all the materials we've seen so far are not really clear that everything is going to go back the way it is. In fact, some of the notes on some of the materials suggest that where they have pavers now, they may end up with asphalt. And it's also not clear. They were saying that at least once a year, maintenance trucks have to go in to maintain it. It's not clear, like, exactly what pathway they would be using. So there were still some things up in the air on that. But the main thing is that they've been told everything is going to go back the way it was. Things are going to be replanted. Pathways will be redone. And that will all be at the cost of the West Falls Church Gateway Project developer.
All right.
But no information was given for what that budget would be, or if there's enough money to return it, or, and there's nothing concrete about it. So the only thing I would like to do is I'd like to add something in our motion. It could be a whereas or something, just a couple things that the expectation is that the developer will fully fund the restoration of the parts of the park that are affected. And I think the other thing is, whereas the Planning Commission finds the West End Park is the best available location, I just say it's the available location. I don't think it's the best anything. It seems like, from what they're saying, it's the only available. So I'd either like to drop that whereas or modify and take out best, because I don't think any of us are totally happy about this and think this is the best thing.
Yes, I concur with that. And Paul, it's awkward because this is the easement. The details of how the park might be afterwards will be part of a site plan update.
Correct.
Which we'll tackle
So
in
it's,
the future.
That asphalt versus brick could be.
Yeah, like asphalt versus brick will be covered there, which of course, once we're down the path, if there's not budget, I mean, we lose leverage on that, but that, technically, that's the flow. That's where we would actually determine what the park's going to look like when it's done.
Correct. So there, as you said, there are two approvals required for this. The first is this easement, which is the conversation tonight, which is the land area, and then the second would be the site plan. And the site plan is where landscaping, site design, material selection, that would all be finalized.
All right.
Yeah, and I recognize that. I just,
Yeah, no, I know. I just want.
when you get to site plan, you're
Sure,
stuck with
we
whatever
lose leverage for
they give
sure,
you.
yeah. Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, just one issue that I have that has been resolved is the issue of whether or not Howard Herman Park we raised that at the last meeting, and there was nothing in the staff report. So in the meantime, I reached out to staff, and they did provide some additional research. Howard Herman Park is only 25 feet wide at the beginning, and they require at least 20 feet. So that leaves a very small amount. Plus, most of that park is an RPA or floodplain, which
Okay.
does not make it a good candidate. So I think we can say conclusively, we can rule out that whether it's the best, that's debatable, and I agree with your limitation. But at least I feel like we've looked at all of the possible locations. narrowed it down.
Brad, do you have some?
I mean, not much to add. I mean, I was not here on the second. I did watch that part of the hearing and look through the materials. And I think Ms. Teets is correct. It's really the only available location. It's not an ideal situation, but I feel like the plan attempts to minimize the negative impacts on the park going forward. And if we can make sure that it's restored, not at city expense, that would be even better. And so with that, I think, I'll support the motion tonight to allow the regulator station to be moved here.
Did have one other question. I don't know, Mr. Stoddard, if you know the answer to this or not, but originally the regulator was supposed to go, I think it was described in the staff report as at the location between Route 7 and the shared parking garage. But that when the shared parking garage went away, that option went away, but it wasn't clear kind of what happened there in terms of the dynamics. Was that land
I think,
gone? Or?
I think, and Russ and Ms. Weiss, I'll get to you in a minute if you have any questions. But I do think there is another possibility, which maybe, well, certainly too late for us to figure out before deciding tonight. But the surface lot, there was going to be a shared parking structure between the economic development project and the schools. That went away. And now there's just going to be a surface lot for the schools. I think that surface lot could accommodate this facility. It would obviously take up parking spaces. And so I don't know that that is a better option, but I think it is technically an option. And I think that we could mention that in the motion if we thought that that was worth asking City Council to consider before they take final action. But I think it's probably a long shot just because of the number of parking spaces that we lost, and I don't fully understand the timing of all of the stuff happening up there if this has to happen before other things. But presumably it could have gone into the shared parking structure, which was built into the timing somehow, so.
Yeah, it just wasn't clear what the explanation was as to why that option went away.
Yeah, so as was originally, I think, discussed when infrastructure for the site was being laid out, that was the expectation of a shared garage between the schools and the 10-acre development. And when you move to a structured parking, that means some of the land areas opened up for other things like utility needs. And so the original design did include, although right on the frontage of Route 7, a gas regulator station. When the shared parking structure went away, so did that available land that was freed up by doing structured parking. And so suddenly once you move to horizontal parking on the surface, that's what that land got used for. So any changes to that lot would obviously be an impact to the ongoing review of the high school site plan, as well as any joint agreements between the schools and the city regarding development and the use of the trapezoid. So it's certainly a complex issue. And I think that's the issue for the Planning Commission tonight, is that in order to keep the rest of the project on schedule, the intent is to try and get the regulator to construction as soon as possible.
But it sounds like the trade-off was losing some number of spaces in that surface parking lot if the regulators stayed at that location.
Yeah, it's not only the use, it's also who's involved in making that trade. So right now, the expectation is that that trapezoid lot is for use by the schools, not for infrastructure.
Yeah, so more time and, I mean, maybe quicker action on this, maybe we could have dealt with that, but I agree that we're kind of out of time. Our remote participants, do you guys have any comments or questions?
I do not. Yeah, I don't have much to add either. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I thought it was unfortunate that it had to be placed there, but I mirror everything that everyone else has said. So nothing really substantial to add.
Okay. Yeah, my thoughts are just, it's the sort of thing that it's unfortunate. I mean, hopefully, whatever happens at West End Park in the long run won't be a big negative on that area, and obviously something has to happen, and I agree that keeping this project up there on track is important. So, maybe if we had seen this months and months and months ago, we could have pushed on the idea of getting into the school's parking lot. I don't know that has much of a chance now. So the question is, we need a motion. It's got a lot of whereases. I personally support at least dropping the best available location, because I don't know why, unless there's some legal requirement that it be the best available location, I'm fine with dropping the entire whereas, or at least not mentioning the best part. It's an available location.
Is a workable location?
It's the least bad option.
The location we're left with.
Yeah.
I think we should just skip that one. I don't think,
Could we just skip the whole thing? The whole whereas? All right, we can skip that if you guys are comfortable with that. And then I'm fine with Melissa's interest in including a whereas the restoration of the park is fully funded by the developer.
yeah. I was gonna say like,
It's just our advice to
If
city
it's
council.
if it's a recommendation from the commission, so generally the whereas is stating context and rationale for recommendation, whereas.
So a furthermore then?
I think you would want to maybe include it in the second one, because the second one is talking about
Accommodation.
future site plan, and I think you could probably add a clause or a sentence to that second statement there to say that the site plan should reflect high-quality materials.
All right. Melissa, since you want to modify, do you want to make the motion?
yeah, I'll do it. I figured I was gonna have to if I wanted to fix it. Okay, let's start. Whereas the city has requested that Washington Gas relocate a regulator station in order to allow for the future development of the property at the site of the existing George Mason High School and future West Falls Church Economic Development Gateway Project. And whereas the nearest city-owned property that can accommodate this facility is the West End Park. And whereas the city's franchise agreement with Washington Gas allows for location of gas distribution facilities in city right-of-ways and on other public property. And whereas the Washington Gas requires an easement over the city's property at the West End Park. Whereas the required easement over the city's property at West End Park is generally consistent with zoning and a comprehensive plan. And whereas the Washington Gas future construction on a regulator station and gas lines at West End Park will require a site plan amendment to the current site plan to reflect the changes in landscape and hardscape. And now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council that an easement for a regulator station as described in the draft resolution shown on the attached plat should be granted to Washington Gas, and the city manager is authorized to execute the deed of easement subject to approval of the document by the city attorney. Furthermore, the Planning Commission acknowledges that this time it is providing a recommendation to City Council on the requested easement only, and that the Planning Commission is not recommending or approving any other activities on the park site, nor the related site plan amendment for West End Park, which is subject to City Code site plan requirements review and final action. And, how do I say this? And the expectation during site plan is that the developer will commit to the full restoration of the park with high-quality materials.
All right.
Second.
A second. Any comments or thoughts before we vote? All right, Ms. Bazemore, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Fuentes?
Yes.
Mr. Wodiska?
Yes.
Ms. Weiss?
Yes.
All right, that one passes. Thank you, everyone. Now we're on to item 6B, Founders Row Eastern Facade Community Art. I think you probably have a quick explanation of this as well, right?
Thank you, Chair Rankin and members of the commission. This is your second action item on tonight's agenda. It is not a review of a specific proposal, but rather it is a kickoff to the engagement process, and specifically the engagement process with the Arts and Humanities Council on their recommendations and inputs to public art along the eastern facade of the Founders Row project, located at the intersections of Broad and West, Northwest, and Park Avenue, currently under construction. Let me step through some of the pieces of the report. The request, as I said, is a referral from the Planning Commission to formally kick off the engagement, the public engagement process for the Founders Row mural. The recommendation at this time by staff is that you do take an action to refer it out to the Arts and Humanities Council. That would be consistent with the process that was reviewed and accepted by the Planning Commission and also reviewed favorably by the Arts and Humanities Council in the last quarter of last year, September and October timeframe. Let me jump actually to the timing section, which begins on line 123 in the staff report. Thank you, Emily, for pulling it up on, Ms. Bazemore for pulling it up on the screen. As you can see, the draft procedures were shared with Arts and Humanities in September. Planning Commission looked at them in October. In February, late February, the applicant made their submittal saying that they wanted to formally kick off the engagement process for the design of this public art piece. Per the procedure, planning staff is bringing that to Planning Commission for a referral out to the Arts and Humanities Council. And then there would be several months. I think we're going to need to look at that schedule about how many public meetings we're holding and how are members of the Arts and Humanities Council and public able to engage in the process. But as drafted, the intent is to spend several months working with the Arts and Humanities Council as well as the Architecture Advisory Board on the design and placement of that art. And then after that engagement with those two groups, bring it to the commission for formal actions on reviewing the artist recommendation, reviewing the art concept, and then formalizing that with a site plan amendment. So I think sometimes referrals have a heavy sound to them, and the expectation is that this is the proposal before you and there's being a request for action. I think in this case, referral is interpreted as the start of the process and getting it to the Arts and Humanities Council.
Right. And I know that the applicant, there's no one from the applicant here today due to global pandemic. And normally they would be here, but also I'm sure you guys have all looked at the materials. The materials they have so far are just sort of conceptual high level. They're not specific to this location or Falls Church. So were you done, Mr. Steiner?
Just to highlight a couple things about why this is coming to the commission. Normally, public art would not require a site plan amendment. The reason this is coming before the commission is that it was a specific condition in the voluntary concessions that were part of the project's entitlements. That voluntary concession stipulated that there would be public art as part of the project and that the public art would be reviewed through the site plan process. At the time the site plan was approved, the public art itself had not been finalized, and so the site plan approval stipulated that there would be a site plan amendment, and so that's the process that's being started, and Planning Commission holds final votes on site plans and site plan amendments. So that's why this particular application is coming before you. What also is included in the staff report are some of the background policies. The city's policies have a history of promoting the benefits of public art and encouraging its use and installation along major corridors and at highly visible sites, and that some of the excerpts are included in your staff report for background. That does conclude the staff report. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. Mr. Stevens.
On line 127 of the staff report, you talk about the Planning Commission referral to the Arts and Humanities, and then also AABs. Should we be including Architectural Advisory Board in our referral?
That was a conversation as we were drafting up the report. By code, site plans already go to the AAB. And so when we were drafting up the report, we made the decision not to make that a specific referral because it already goes to them. I think we wanted to avoid somehow saying that it's the Planning Commission that's referring it to the AAB because by code it already goes to them.
So whether we refer it or not, they're getting it.
It's,
Right.
right.
So we don't need to do it.
But
Correct.
As part of this motion, right?
questions down here? Brett, you got anything? Remote participants, any questions?
Public art is good.
No.
No.
I mean, I know there's some concern by some people involved in this process about having us refer it over prior to any kind of particular concepts for this site. But as Mr. Steiner said, I think the point of referring it over is to get the process going, have the Arts and Humanities Council give the applicant some guidance before they show up with, designs that they have their heart set on. So I think this is probably the appropriate way to go. As we saw in the schedule, there's plenty of public engagement to go. There's no, we're not approving anything at all other than, sure, let's start the process and have other people provide input. So I think it's a no-brainer. So unless we have anything, quick motion to send this over.
Is there any thought that we would react to any of these concepts tonight, or is it appropriate to defer that until we get input from the other boards and commissions?
Some of the email traffic I saw, and I saw it late, so unfortunately I didn't have time to engage with the emails and get that information to the commission. But as I understood it, not only were there questions about process, but the substance of it, wanting to see more in the concepts that connected to Falls Church specifically. So are there particular elements of the city that should be reflected in the art? I think if that's a direction that the commission supported, that could certainly be stated in the motion. If there are ideas that you all have, as the chair said, I'd be nervous about providing too much direction before the brainstorming process has started. You don't want a formal action to box in creativity. Certainly it could be worth it, perhaps as individual members, maybe communicate those over to me and I could forward them over to the Arts and Humanities Council, versus putting them in the formal motion, and then you may have put a box around the process that may be limiting it from the start.
Yeah, I think the materials provided, if the applicant had been here, probably could have talked a little bit about the consultant that they're using to run the process, and we might have learned more about how they go from this to whatever the more specific stuff is. But I feel like that'll just have to be part of
TBD.
part of the next meeting that they have with the Arts and Community Council, which who knows when that meeting is going to happen based on current events.
Right.
So.
I do have a question about this, actually.
Okay.
So the next step in the process in terms of our role is that the applicant will we will have to approve the artist. So is the expectation that we will simply see a proposal for one artist from the Arts and Humanities Council, or will they be proposing options? And at that point, I guess, just to the point of what's the content, at that point, what's the criteria for deciding on the artist?
It's pretty fluid. So this is what was presented to the commission and the Arts and Humanities Council back in September and October of last year was a first cut at what would a public art review policy look like for Falls Church. It was borrowed and modified, adapted. It was adapted from Arlington County's process to what might work with a Falls Church procedure, given a smaller number of cases moving through and less of a standing infrastructure and more of an ad hoc process to look at these proposals on a case-by-case basis. So there is an expectation that it would go through a number of steps where the applicant would engage with several artists. Each artist would have the opportunity to come up with several ideas. Those would be presented to Arts and Humanities Council. Arts and Humanities would say, you know, this artist seems to be more on track with where we think this project ought to go. That would be agreed upon by the Planning Commission. And then once the artist is selected, a similar idea of stepping through a few concepts, getting Art and Humanities ideas on it, getting Planning Commission's agreement for the through a formal site plan amendment. Did that answer the question?
It does. I guess I just have a question, like if the staff report comes to us at that time and says, whereas the Planning Commission states that this is the best possible artist, that we just have I don't know, not that it's for us to judge the best possible artist, but when that proposal comes to us, it would be nice to understand the thought process. And I'm sure this would happen in the staff report anyway, but it would just be good to know the rationale, the thought process, the process for considering artists, why the selection was made, and why we are being asked to approve it.
Sure, we can bring that information back to you all in terms of what is the basis for decision making.
Thank you.
Presumably, it's going to tie into comprehensive plan, small area plan, and the usual.
Has to conform to the comprehensive plan. All right, anything else? Did someone make a motion? This is a real easy one.
Chair, I'll move to refer site plan amendment application for Founders Row Mural Public Art to the Arts and Humanities Council of Falls Church for their review and recommendation.
Second.
All right, any last comments? No, we'll take a quick vote.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Ms. Dietz?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Ponces?
Yes.
Ms. Weiss?
Yes.
Mr. Wadiska?
Yes.
All right, 2 down. Really quickly, since we're all here, trying not to breathe on each other, the March 2nd, 2020 minutes. Mr. Krasner was absent, although he admits to having watched the video. Did any
Parts of the video.
parts of the video? Did anyone?
Fast forwarded a lot.
Did anyone have any adjustments to the minutes?
Chair, I move to adopt the minutes.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Abstain.
Aye.
Any opposed? 1 abstention. All right. That wraps up our action items. We're on to number 7, information item 7A, Planning Commissioner reports. Does anyone have any brief Planning Commissioner reports?
CACT was canceled, no, so I don't have that. Rexham
All
Park.
night if we talk about things that were canceled.
I know. So Rexham Park is looking at moving the dates for the master park plan meetings for fellows, obviously, with everything that's going on. So that probably means the process won't start in April, maybe in May, maybe June, but anyway, sometime. So that's on hold.
Last week, we had the 5th community meeting between Founders Row and neighbors. And Founders Row advised that the utility work is almost all done, which is good. They indicated that the crosswalk, which was a big issue during the site plan review that we had, is still not decided. So that has to be done. And we briefly discussed what we covered this evening with respect to the decision process on the mural selection. So that was it. Otherwise, a very positive meeting.
Sounds good. Any remote planning commissioner reports?
Yeah, really quickly, I went to the ADA meeting with Melissa, actually. And maybe you want to just report on it, just be easier from a logistics standpoint, but
Okay, I can report, it's on the wayfinding, and,
yeah.
yeah, and Tim was there too. So they've come down to kind of a basic look of doing a dark blue background so that the letters pop, and the Little City logo, the one with the multicolors, being, for the entry signs, being the biggest piece of it. So that was just one of the comments I made. I thought the City of Falls Church, saying the City of Falls Church should be the biggest part, and the logo should be smaller. But, and then they have the wayfinding sign designs, which are really nice looking. They're, again, the dark blue pops really well. You see the letters on it. And at this point, they're talking about really just doing major things. So it'd be like City Hall, Farmers Market, Cherry Hill Park, maybe Eden Center. So, but they, nothing's final yet. It was
Right.
just like kind of a touch base.
Yeah, I thought it was a useful meeting because the EDA understandably took an approach of what was good for business. That's their role. But there were representatives from other sectors within the community, for example, Tinner Hill, and the need to include that in wayfinding. So there was good input from other sectors in the community, and Mr. Wadiska included a reference to the need to make sure there's wayfinding to the WNOD trail. So.
Yes. And I know the EDA retreat was canceled, since it was going to be in my office, and we said, please don't. All right.
I just have a question.
Sure.
Sorry, it's not really a report, but I don't know when else I can ask the question. So I'm reporting a question, which is, just we certainly have the technology that would allow for public meetings to be done virtually in this very challenging time. So I'm just wondering what it would take to allow for us to continue with our business,
Yeah.
but to
I
do
think it
so
would take a
virtually.
change in state law.
Yeah, state law does not
law.
allow public bodies to meet, even in an emergency, other than to discuss the emergency itself.
Yeah.
I received guidance from the county attorney in Fairfax County just earlier today that indicated that public bodies are only allowed to meet to discuss the emergency itself, and so that more applies to governing bodies who, during like a natural disaster, would need to meet to discuss
Right.
responding to that. For us, we could only meet to discuss that. We couldn't meet to discuss any routine business at all.
Right, and we need 4 people present to even let you guys dial in.
Now, I did hear some state delegates or some state representatives are trying to advance some emergency legislation in Richmond to try to broaden that scope for electronic meetings, but that's, again, emergent. It's an ongoing situation.
Yeah, I
and-
would lobby, that would be great. This would be a good excuse to
Yeah.
bring ourselves into modern times.
Because if we did that, also, just to keep in mind, we would also need to be, there would need to be a way for the public to hear it and listen to it, have an opportunity to, there would need to be, of course, minutes taken. I mean, the whole thing still would need to follow normal FOIA guidelines, and
Yeah,
so.
things that the private sector solved decades ago, but yeah, it could happen.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, I think
for
you're
now-
dealing with people who may or may not have a functional computer
Well, they could
or-
come here and we could sit a computer
Internet.
right here for them to
But
watch
for
it.
now, we're really limited in what we can,
Yeah.
what you're doing right now is about the extent of what electronic meetings, how they can operate
Yeah.
legally.
But with any luck, that might change, but we can't change it. But we could lobby. And then I know we got a letter about the Broad Washington project, and my only reaction to that was we as a body have none official information about any changes to that project. So until we do, it's hard to have any sort of official thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think we were copied
Are
on
we
it.
ever going to get, like, I keep seeing closed sessions of city council that have to do with disposal of property. I obviously don't know what property they're disposing of, but I personally feel strongly about, if the cart gets in front of the horse on that, that might be a mistake. So the sooner we could see something, the better, in my opinion, even in work session or staff report, something,
Closed session.
closed session, whatever, I don't care.
It's an interesting idea to take the commission into a closed session as well, since it does involve city-owned land, which of course Planning Commission makes recommendations on to City Council.
Yeah, I just think the rumors I've heard are a dramatically different project than the one that was approved. So my personal take is it's an all-new thing, and if it shows up here super baked in some format that we aren't cool with, that could be a challenge for the developer.
Yeah, I can certainly take that back and look at what are the options to get that information to the commission.
Thanks. All right, anything from your director's report you want
I'm just going to touch on these things briefly in the interest of time. First, an update that's not included in the report, that is that there was a very positive meeting with emergency management staff and city staff leadership earlier today about moving city hall operations to more of a teleworking operation. The goal we're trying to get to is no more than 50% of the staff inside the building at any time. And so we have a number of groups looking at what does that mean? What tools and equipment do people need to work remotely and work effectively? Is there personal protective equipment that people who are in the field, whether they're the street crews or building inspectors, do they need personal protective equipment? Also, how do we continue providing customer service? Can we provide something like a single physical point of entry into the city so that you can come to one desk and then your materials can be routed appropriately, whether it's going down to the permit counter or the Commissioner of Revenue or the Treasurer's Office, so that City Hall visitors don't have to be touring the entire building. So that work is underway. I think that's a very positive step to keep, obviously, city staff safe, but also the general public safe as well.
to? Just when we get City Hall Wi-Fi working, you guys are all going to work from home.
So, only half. Let's see, other things that were identified. These were things just to bring these to the commission's awareness. LED streetlight replacement, this was included in the capital improvement program that you all took a positive recommendation on recently. The LED replacement project is or is expected to be underway, pending council's acceptance of it. The attachment here just highlights the lighting design options that were brought before the commission. I know they were included in the entire CIP notebook, so I wanted to make sure that you all were aware of the specific recommendations along specific corridors. Second item written up in the report, the fiscal budget narrative. The Planning Commission's rules of procedure provide that Commission should provide some oversight over use of the planning staff's budget. Every year, the planning staff includes a list of expected work plan activities. That's included in the narrative. Of course, this won't be finalized until after council takes action or as part of council taking action. But I did want to bring that to the Planning Commission's attention, and that this is something we could true up against the Planning Commission's work plan, which you all recently reviewed.
Yeah, I reviewed not all 200 pages or whatever, but I reviewed that section and found myself wondering, like, how does this jive with what you guys are trying to do? So maybe in a future meeting we can talk about that.
Yeah, right. This is the staff recommendation, so we were able to use.
So this
the
is, you
materials.
guys are okay with this? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty positive step forward in terms of moving forward some of the key projects in the city, whether it's development, thinking about the future, modernizing the zoning ordinance, moving forward on progressive transportation projects. I think there are good elements in there. And then lastly, to make you all aware, city staff did prepare and submit an application for what we're calling a walkable green streets project. This is not the PED plan part 2. Instead, this would be a neighborhood-driven process where some street that has self-identified as having a combination of flooding issues and a need of neighborhood traffic calming would come forward and say, we're interested in exploring this idea. And presuming we're successful in getting the grant, we would have design money to put to their problem to roll out things like permeable paving, more street trees, perhaps within the right-of-way or bioswales to capture some of the rainwater. And green infrastructure isn't going to be the whole solution for stormwater, and it's not going to be the whole solution for neighborhood traffic calming, but it is a way to bring these two things together and perhaps join multiple funding pots and make a more efficient use of public funds. Staff is also preparing an application for another venture, same project but with a different funding agency. This would be for funds that are designed to preserve the Chesapeake Bay. But again, we'd be going for the same multi-pronged approach of providing improved quality of life through stormwater management, neighborhood traffic calming, and of course, greening the streets.
Excellent. Sounds great. Okay, is that all you have?
That concludes my report. Thank you.
So our next scheduled meeting is April 6th. That's technically spring break. There's a chance I won't be around. There's also a chance I'll be confined to my house, so
Me too.
it's hard to predict, but are any of the items on that day super time sensitive? There's a lot of items with actions, so.
One item that is, there are a couple items that are time sensitive. Well, one specifically, WOD dual trail site plan. That is an action that could be approved administratively, but the commission did communicate that it wanted to take the action on that. The applicant has come in with their materials. There is sufficient time to complete our staff review and bring it to the commission for action. And assuming a positive review, of course, that's still underway. The expectation is to try and bring that to the commission for action on April 6th. The other items, Southgate 2, the 212 East Jefferson subdivision, and the West End Park site plan, we could look at whether those are time sensitive, but I think the WNOD is one that is sensitive.
All right, well, we can see how things are shaping up. There's a chance I won't be here.
There's a chance I won't be here, assuming we're allowed to travel. I won't be
I was
here.
definitely not going to be here, but now I don't know what I'm doing.
All right, well, we'll
We
keep
can
you.
do, I think what we can do, probably this week, late this week, we could put out a quorum call to the commission. And then based on that, Chair, maybe you and I would have a discussion.
All right, and then depending on how things are shaping up, maybe aim for just one meeting that month?
Yeah, I think what we might be able to do, if people are not available April 6th, maybe we look at April 20th as the regularly scheduled meeting, or maybe we combine and move it to April 16th, so that
Yeah,
the
as I say,
applicants are
other
here for the week.
than spring break, which realistically, who knows? I got nothing going on for the next 2 months. So, all right, well, we'll be in touch on that. Anything else?
That is all.
Adjourn, let's get out of here.